Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about career switching. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, I'm one of those career switchers that got into programming without a CS background. I've been doing front end for the last year. Lately, I've also been doing some back end for toy projects of my own. Someone recently shared with me an extensive good quality course on data structures and algorithms that uses C++. I'm considering doing it, but I think that there are other things that I could improve first that would give me more market value in the short term. Do you think that learning computer science related stuff is something that someone in my situation should do as soon as possible? If not, after covering which areas should I go for that? Well, what I usually advocate to people is that you should use goal focused learning. That's what I try to advocate at the very least. Basically, what I mean is that there are usually two types of people. People usually have two strategies for learning. One is hoarder, and the other one is goal. Hoarder basically means that you're trying to hoard as much knowledge as possible, which is you go for width basically. And basically, what happens when you do that is that you create a situation where you don't really feel comfortable doing something that I argue is more important than just learning until you have the full picture, until you feel like you're done, you've collected all the information. It's very similar to how you may or may not have friends or people online or so forth to say, oh, I can't really start going for runs, or I can't really start working out until I've figured out the perfect running shoe for me, or the perfect workout routine, or things like that. They're basically trying to just gather data to make them see. In many cases, it's an emotional thing. Uh, they're basically procrastinating action in favor of acquiring as much information as possible, and that's not learning in my if you ask me at the very least. uh, it's well, we can argue about that, but it's not a very efficient strategy I've found. The goal-oriented thing has to do with that you need to achieve something. In other words, you reverse the thing. You're not trying to achieve the highest amount of knowledge for the sake of knowledge itself. You're trying to figure out how to execute something on something, which is usually something that requires knowledge. I hope that that makes sense, because now what you're basically doing is that you're scoping what you need to learn in order to execute said task. And the beauty about that is that basically once you have learned how to achieve the task, you need to just find another task. You will get exactly the same end result as the hoarder. It's just that by the end of that, you will have something the hoarder will not, which is experience, hands-on experience. You've done 100 things, and through that you have learned all the things that you need. You got that width that you were dreaming about, but you also have tons of projects, experience, which you can't get from just reading tutorials or doing like hobby projects or things like that. You've actually made things, and so the measurement you should have here, if you ask me at the very least, is that you pick a area which seems to be the most reasonable starting point for whatever goal that you have. So let's say that in this case you seem to be interested in front end primarily. Well, so I ask you, have you learned how to build things efficiently within front end? And some people don't know. Like, they don't really have an idea of, okay, when am I done with front end? I go, well, technically I can sit here and say the boring obvious thing, and that is that you're never done, because software always moves and there's always something new to learn and all that good stuff, which is absolutely true. But then again, I also advocate that there are reasonable assumptions that we can apply to most things. I would argue that, it's the same thing as with martial arts, that where you say that you can only get better, and I go, yeah, absolutely. But at some point, I think we can all agree that people like Bruce Lee or Mike Tyson or so forth, like at some point you're sort of at the level where most people would feel like, yeah, it wouldn't be weird if you decided to start spending time with your kids, start up a side business, or do something other than martial arts, because you're pretty good at that thing at this point. And the way I argue that you should figure out when you're pretty good at the thing that you're doing is that you can consistently produce results that are on par with what most people expect from whatever you're doing. So if we're doing the martial arts thing, if you usually do really well in the ring or in competitions or on practice, depending on your skill and like your ambition level, then you're pretty much where you need to be. And as a software developer, if you can do a uni level job, or you can basically deliver on most stores and so forth, then you're pretty good at the thing that you're doing. And the measurement I like to use is boredom. Boredom is my personal measurement. When I feel like I've done something 100 times and it's not really interesting anymore, it's probably time to start looking at something that I find more interesting. And that's basically my entire tip to you. Use boredom to your advantage, because usually the people who stagnate, who really don't continue growing, are the people who use just the fear, which is very commonly associated with being new at something. They use the fear to have the motivation to learn just what they need in order to do, as I said, sort of just do the thing that will make them survive within the industry. Like they've learned enough to do a junior levels job, and by pure, well, experience, they're going to acquire some more knowledge, but in many cases they just stay where they are. That's why I tell people that most software developers don't really learn much more, or they don't acquire more value after the first 5 years on average. It's the people who have, as I said, the idea that, all right, you have learned this thing, it's not fulfilling anymore, okay, so let's go and find the next thing. Like that's the difference between lifelong learning and survival, if you ask me. Survival mentality is that you learn a skill just so that you get food for the day, or like a roof over your head. That's the goal, which is the common software developer. Lifelong learning is usually goal oriented. You're basically just learning another thing and then another thing, because you want to achieve something, you want to do the next thing, or learn about the next thing. And that's my suggestion to you. Approach the problem from that angle. At least that has worked really well for me. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you want to know when it's time for you to learn computer science versus whatever have you, it basically comes down to figuring out the thing that you're trying to achieve. Have you achieved that thing? How do you know when you have achieved it? Well, when you can basically produce at the sort of level that you are working at, depending on where you are. As I said, in martial arts or things like that, it's different levels of competition. If you know your stuff for the point in time that you find yourself, use boredom. If it's no longer scary and it doesn't really feel like you're doing something that feels stimulating all that much with just doing the regular front end stuff, try something else. That's really all there is to it. And in this case for you, it might have been, take a course in computer science, or you're learning about data structures and algorithms or things like that. It really just comes down to do you feel comfortable that you have reached the first goal, and then you take the next one. Unless you go with the hoarder thing, as I said. If you're doing the hoarder thing, then you can just start whenever, because the hoarder approach is just learn everything all the time, for everything. And as I said, that's not necessarily a bad strategy. It will absolutely give you some results, but I've always found that goal-oriented learning is more direct. It's more efficient for acquiring skills quickly or moving in some direction, because basically in a sense you can call it MVP style. You're shipping something, a small application that has some value, and then you iterate and do it again, or add to it, or add to it, or add to it. If you do it the hoarder way, you're basically never shipping any code or achieving quote unquote anything until you're completely done, which in a learning situation is very unlikely. It's just that you're going to keep on learning, and you may not actually practice the way that you should be doing, because you're just consuming information without executing. And as I've said before, guys, executing is the thing that is going to give you experience, and experience is the thing that you create first from learning and then applying. And experience is usually the thing that is, as I say, it's the gold standard. It's the thing that turns into wisdom. Have a great day.